US President Donald Trump does not plan to lift the sanctions imposed on the Russian companies Gazprom Neft and Lukoil. He stated this in an interview with Fox News. At the same time, Trump announced new powerful restrictions on the Russian oil business, which will come into effect in the near future. He did not provide details, but emphasized that these measures will make conducting oil business in Russia much more difficult. Let us recall that, at Trump's initiative, the US imposed sanctions against two oil giants of the Russian Federation, Gazprom Neft and Lukoil. All economic transactions with them are prohibited. The sanctions came into effect on November 21st. But for some of Lukoil's subsidiaries, they were postponed until December 13th to give the company time to sell its international assets. And Vasil Furman, Doctor of Economic Sciences, is now joining us live. Mr. Vasil, welcome.
Greetings to you. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. We'd like to talk about the sanctions. I hope we'll also have time to discuss the military levy a bit. So about the sanctions. The sanctions have been postponed until December 13th, let's put it that way, regarding Lukoil. These days, in principle, are enough time for the company to manage to sell its international assets. So, was this done to benefit them, or is this just the standard business approach, even though it's Russian business? Please explain these processes.
The imposition of sanctions today against major Russian companies is a very important strategic step by our partners because, let me remind our viewers, 30 to 35% of all revenues received by the Russian Federation come from the sale of energy resources. And if there are sanctions, it means that all companies will not be able to sell their energy resources. 80% of everything that the Russian Federation sells, for example, oil, is bought by just two countries, China and India. And when the US literally a month ago imposed these sanctions against those two companies, Rosneft and Lukoil, it hit their exports much harder because it was precisely these two companies that provided significant export supplies to those countries. On the one hand, and on the other hand, we've also heard various statements published in leading global outlets, including Reuters and Bloomberg, where it was reported, for example, that Indian state companies are looking for alternative sources of oil supply, meaning not Russian oil. In other words, they will refuse, meaning they will no longer be purchasing it. This is a huge plus. On the other hand, regarding the issue you mentioned, these companies own significant assets in various countries around the world. And when sanctions are imposed, particularly, for example, in the US, it means that as a general rule, it is important to note that European banks or European clients are afraid of sanctions or secondary sanctions, meaning for possible cooperation, and they usually refuse to work with Russian companies or companies with Russian capital. And that's why they have an urgent need to sell their assets. Even if they genuinely wanted to perform with companies under their control, they were ultimately not able to do so. And now they are looking for new, different investors. How this issue will be resolved, we will see. Because in my personal opinion, as an expert, there is a lot of economics involved in these issues. On the one hand, since the sanctions have a very strong impact, and on the other hand, there is a lot of politics. Because, for example, I know that there are many, if we're talking about banks, European banks operating in Russia, and they want to leave the Russian market, but they are looking for investors, even though the terms of sale are very onerous. For instance, the sale price must be less than half the market value, and they have to pay additional taxes to the Russian budget. So the Europeans are even agreeing to these terms. But, for example, their central bank and refuses to approve the deal, finding various reasons why it's not possible to sell that bank operating in the Russian Federation. So what I'm getting at is that these are political levers. In other words, they can always say that the image of the potential investor is not suitable, for example, to purchase such a large asset. That's why politics, economics, the key point is that today everything will still come down to this. In any case, the war in Ukraine needs to be brought to an end. And one way or another, the Russian Federation understands this. Whether it will actually agree, for example, to the peace plan that the Ukrainian delegation discussed together with our partners in Switzerland yesterday, we'll see, probably even today, there will likely be some kind of reaction from them.
I also wanted to take a moment to talk to you about the recently held call with the aggressor, Vladimir Putin, which was officially announced the day before by Recep Tayyip Erdogan. But this concerns something important for us. Erdogan said that they will discuss the renewal of the grain deal. How much do we actually need this grain corridor? How crucial is it here? It's clear that it can, of course, contribute to this, but why does this topic keep coming up again? Please explain.